everyone. Welcome back. It's I feel like I never left the stage. And the lights are very bright up here. Fine. Let me see.
Can you move the microphone into your...
I certainly can. How's this? Is that better?
Yeah.
So, welcome to the session. We're talking today as the slide, as the title here says, about longevity, lies, and the fountain of youth. It took me all of about 10 seconds to come up with that title, but actually it's quite explicit because we're gonna delve into this to the latest health and wellness trend of longevity. I'm gonna start off by trying to define it. We'll look at the very unhelpful dictionary definition, and then we'll get into what it means more for the health and wellness more broadly. And then we're going to explore a bunch of different topics, all related to longevity and health and wellness. And we're going to get into some of the slightly more contentious topics, some of the people who are making a lot of money off of longevity, some of the trends, some of those that are more benign, and then others that are a little bit more harmful. And then we'll finish more or less on time, and we will try and leave you with some kind of lasting, I suppose you could say, advice on how to obtain real health and longevity in this very convoluted and confused space. So thank you to my wonderful panel, Rina and Timothy. It's great to have you both here. Let's begin with okay, so there's going to be some Mentimeter polls. Let's try and define longevity.
Oh, okay. This is my favorite.
Before you jump in, I've got the dictionary definitions just to get us started. So let's see how they go. So we've got the Oxford English Dictionary, obviously, because I'm English, so we have to use the Oxford English Dictionary, and it says this: longevity of a person or animal, the fact or quality of living a long life. Also duration of life. Well, that doesn't tell us anything that we didn't already know.
Yeah, and also I think the way longevity is used these days, it's referring to sometimes life extension, but then also quality of life, so health span and lifespan. It's really, really hard to define, kind of like the term wellness. In fact, if you look at most news reports these days, they're actually deleting the term wellness and just putting in longevity because it's a new marketing term. It comes from real science, emerging science, but it's kind of devolved into this term that can kind of mean anything. Are we talking about preventative health? Are we talking about decreasing biological age? Are we talking about optimization? It really is kind of a shape-shifting term that can kind of mean anything, which is why when you say the term longevity, people think of maybe biohacking or supplements or experimental therapies, but maybe also nutrition and fitness. So it can actually mean anything, which is why it's so very lucrative.
Yeah, that's an important point. Timothy, do you think that the term longevity is ambiguous by design?
I think it does work in two spaces, exactly like Rina outlined. There's that concrete message that I think most of the influencers push. When they say longevity, they often try to pretend like we're talking about health span, we're talking about all these noble pursuits. Hey, they really mean you're going to live longer and you're going to optimize your life and you're going to look younger. It's a little bit of an anti-aging promise too. There's a little bit of vanity built into the influencer world that you see. And I totally agree with Rina. They wanted to do a lot of heavy lifting, so to speak, because they want to sell products, ideas, and brands that kind of do all the above, right? So it's a big promise. Longevity has become a big promise, just like wellness used to do, right, Rina? It's a big promise, and unfortunately, I think it's getting a lot of purchase. And the other interesting thing about longevity, and something that our team's actually done a lot of research on, versus wellness, and I'm curious what you guys think about this, is it's a little bit more sciencey. You know, the wellness world, I think, originally started very much in that counterculture alternative world, and it was a different way of knowing to be better. And now it's more longevity. It's regeneration and supplements, and it has a little bit of a sciencey quantum. It has a little bit of a sciencey element to it, which I think is, I won't call it unique, but we're leaning into that a little bit more. And let's be honest, we're also seeing a lot of rich old white men pushing this notion that I think is also part of the equation.
And I agree with you, it totally comes from real scientific findings. Like there is an actual longevity scientific field. Unfortunately, it's kind of been divorced from that in its market and use. And so when we talk about longevity, I also have to ask, are you talking about the actual science? Or are you talking about the marketing term that is selling all of these clinics and all of these different products? And it's funny, I see a lot of parallels between the microbiome sector and the longevity sector, because the microbiome sector is another field that has really promising budding research that you can't extrapolate from just yet. And just like longevity, it's a bunch of hucksters who are using this very budding, promising science to sell you a bunch of stuff, usually at-home testing kits, and then, of course, a bunch of supplements. And that's where I think people get very, very confused.
Nick, can I comment on that real quick?
Yeah,
Because I totally agree with you about the microbiome. We actually had a big microbiome hype research project where we actually looked at exactly what you're talking about. And microbiome is fascinating. If we went, let's get in the time machine and go back 5, 6, 7 years, and you went on the street and brought up the term microbiome. What do you think? You think 10% of people would have a sense of what it was, what you were talking about, the microbiome? Now it's on every product. It's on yogurt bottles, right? And it's completely disconnected from the
gut health sodas.
Yeah, gut health. Yeah, we've done research on what gut health means, and there's actually almost no science to back up any of the claims. It's a really good example of science exploitation. But in the longevity field, we're seeing that also with stem cells. The word stem cells, regeneration is thrown around everywhere. Telomere, that's thrown around everywhere. Personalization, precision medicine, that's thrown around everywhere to give it that veneer of scientific credibility, even though it's really divorced from the actual science.
Well, I was just going to let me just move this forward a little bit, because we've got a couple of other dictionary definitions. Again, they all say pretty much the same thing. And then we've got what longevity means to the health and wellness industry more broadly, which is what we're talking about now. Terms that come to mind, and we've already thrown around some of these words, are things like supplements and red light therapy and cold plunges and sleep and biohacking, genetic testing, microbiome. It seems like longevity is this new umbrella term. And what I was sort of alluding to earlier is that I wrote a little while ago about this term wellness, and the term wellness is really ill-defined, and it's very ambiguous by design, because if you tell somebody that I will improve your wellness, it's very easy to defend in an argument or in court, because you can't really hang your hat on anything. Whereas if you make an explicit claim, like I will reduce your blood pressure, I will help reduce your cholesterol, I will improve your cardiovascular health, these are all very specific, quantifiable outcomes. Whereas improving wellness is very ambiguous, and its longevity is kind of the same idea, and actually there's no way to strictly define it, and I guess that's sort of the point, isn't it?
Yeah, and especially with longevity, they do try to promise specific things, but they're actually meaningless terms, like decrease cellular aging. Okay, what do you mean? What are you talking about there?
At the cellular level.
Yeah, at the cellular level. Like, who's actually going to be testing your cells? So they do try to promise specific things, and they sound so scientific and so promising that you might believe it. But if you actually analyzed it, it means absolutely nothing.
Well, this comes back to the science exploitation idea that Timothy just mentioned, and actually, we're in a few minutes we're going to start talking about Bryan Johnson. I know you've already covered him to some extent. I show a short clip, and it just reminds me that they talk about using red light therapy to activate the mitochondria, which again is a very science-sounding term, but actually, if your mitochondria weren't activated, you'd be dead. So these are meaningless terms, and they sound sciencey and they sound very reasonable, but they don't actually mean anything. So this is, again, we've sort of already touched upon this. This is a simple lifespan versus health span curve on the screen. You can see it on here.
And one thing I'd like to add is that what bothers me so much, and I see this especially a lot by the media, is the way that they talk about longevity, and it's a matter of like, oh, we're figuring out aging. Not exactly. Most of these studies and trials have been done in mice, so it's not necessarily applicable to humans just yet. But they make it sound like, no, we've kind of figured it out. That's like saying you figured out the metabolism. It's so complex. It's not usually even just one factor that affects aging, but that's how it's kind of being billed to the public. And so they would believe that you could take a pill or have some sort of test that would help figure it out, because they're literally taught this type of idea where it's just one thing affecting aging.
The graph that you can see on the screen here sort of tries to distinguish between lifespan and health span, which we've mentioned, and the idea that longevity is when you can, a good longevity is when you can maximize both. I know this is a little bit of a false dichotomy, but if you had to choose between having a shorter life but a longer health span, so a better quality of life, or a longer life but maybe you were sick the last 20, 30 years, did you have any idea what was?
How bad is the life? What we talking?
Well, you can kind of define it however you like.
I think most people pick quality of life depending on what are the issues.
I feel like there's research on this that people pick health span, but I as I said, earlier, I think because they'll say we're calling it longevity, but this is really about health span, but they really mean both. You're going to live longer, you're going to look better, Nick, and you know what? It's going to be a great quality of life. That's the promise. They're not asking you to choose between the two of them, even though sometimes when pressed, they'll say, well, this is really about health span, because I think that seems maybe less vain and more kind of noble and understandable. But if you look at the websites and what these people, they mean both. They mean they're not, you don't have to choose, you're going to get both with my plan.
Because in a lot of the research that I do as part of my role, I look at, I'm interested in extreme exercises. So we're talking about people who do extreme triathlons and ultra marathons and things like this. And there's a growing body of knowledge that this type of exercise actually has poor long-term effects on physical health. So you'll get positive adaptations if you're exercising maybe 6 to 8 hours a week. That seems to be the upper threshold. Beyond that, it's diminishing returns. And if you start doing ultra marathons and Ironman triathlons and things, it can actually have poor long-term effects on your cardiovascular health. But when you do polls on people who engage in these types of activities, and you actually present them with this question, okay, if you knew without any shadow of a doubt that what you were doing was having a negative effect on your health, would you stop doing it? And overwhelmingly, these athletes say no, they wouldn't stop doing it. So they're very overtly, very consciously choosing the better quality of life over the long-term implications, which I find interesting. Maybe there's a certain degree of cognitive dissonance in that as well.
Or addiction to exercise?
Well, there's a lot of that as well, yeah.
But are they saying that they want to keep doing it? Why? Because they think what's going to benefit me, it may not benefit most people, but it's going to benefit me, or do they enjoy it, or is it an addiction? Do you have a sense?
Well, it's multifaceted, and it depends, because you'll have different, people do it for different reasons. There's more exercise addiction in that cohort of people than there are in other groups of exercisers and other athletes. There's more eating disorders in this group as well. A lot of people get into extreme sports because they're replacing one addiction with another. So they used to be alcoholics, or they used to be drug addicts, and now they've just sort of, they're using their energies and their time in a little bit more of a productive way. So I suppose it's the lesser of two evils.
Can I go on, ask you a question about exercise and longevity? And we're talking about them like we're sounding a little bit like conspiracy theorists here. Like there's this
I know where you're going with this.
We're going to start naming a few in a bit, I know. But it must drive you nuts as an exercise expert, the way they act like they invented exercise. Like, you know what? You want to live a long time, exercise and eat well. Does that drive you nuts?
Yeah, I suppose it does. I mean, the thing is that most of what I do now is I get questions all the time, whether it's by email or on social media or in person, people asking me, okay, what's the best way to accomplish this? How do I do this? What's the best thing to do here? How much should I sleep? What supplements should I take? And everybody already knows what the optimum way to maximize your health and quality of life and your mental health is to be physically active, eat well, and don't smoke, and get good sleep, right? I mean, it's
so boring, but that's so boring.
It's boring, and it's not monetizable, really. It can't be wrapped up and packaged and sold to the consumer.
There's no good content there.
And there's no good content there, right? Exactly. So let's move on to the next slide. You're going to love this one, Timothy. So this is Dr. Peter Attia.
I already heard some groans from the audience.
They're one step ahead. This is an educated audience, that's why. So he's a physician specializing in longevity, metabolic health, and performance. I'm not sure whatever that means. He is known for his expertise in preventative medicine with a focus on delaying the onset of chronic diseases. He focuses on interventions like nutrition, exercise, sleep optimization. Attia hosts the Drive podcast. Anybody, show of hands if you've listened to the Attia podcast? A couple of people. I've heard it a couple of times. It's pretty good. Where he discusses health science and is author of the best-selling Outlive, which you can see here, The Science and Art of Longevity. He was recently on Oprah, which is a pretty good endorsement. Yeah.
Of pseudoscience.
What do we think of people like Attia who use longevity to raise their profile? Is it for the greater public good? Is it a good thing that people are thinking more about their diet and exercise and sleep? Or, I know it sounds like a loaded question, but it is a sincere question. Are people like Attia good for population health, or is it having a net negative effect?
I'll let you start.
And you don't have to make reference to Attia directly.
I'm sure you guys can agree with me. You can put a lot of these people on a continuum. You can, and I won't use his name, but there are those that they do invite people to do, all the things you're supposed to do: exercise, sleep, etc. But there's always a veneer of pseudoscience or a veneer of science hype. And also, I think it can often take, and there's some research to back this up, and I'm sure you know the research better than I, it can take a little bit of, everything is instrumentalized, right? Optimum sleep, as if we didn't know how to sleep before. Optimize your sleep, right? Sleep, it's a competition, right? If you wear a watch, you can figure out how much you're sleeping better than your wife. Some of the ads even do that, right? They push the idea whether I sleep better than you, and these kinds of, I think, I'm not pointing at him like I'm talking about him now.
Too late. It's on camera.
But they invite that for sure, and I don't think that's healthy. And I actually think there's evidence to suggest it's not healthy, because it really is about a balanced lifestyle, right? That you enjoy, and you have community, and you enjoy these activities. Everything's not about this optimization of the moment. And that's the other element. I just used the word optimization. So much of this, I think, is also pointed at that, right? Somehow you're going to be a better human being. You're going to be. It's that idea that if you're not doing the things that I suggest, you are somehow less noble. You're less valuable. You should almost feel guilty.
It's like virtue signaling.
Yeah, there's a lot of virtue. You should feel guilty, and you certainly see that in how their followers respond to the messaging, right? And I think that's problematic. And the other thing I find problematic, I think I've talked to a few people at coffee breaks about this, how everything is you have to measure everything. You've got to measure everything. You've got to measure all your exercise and your sleep, and you've got to get your genes tested, and you've got to get your poop tested, and all of that. I don't think that does any good at all, and I think it probably in the aggregate does harm. And I also think this stuff invites the selling of unproven products. At least, so, like as I touched on in my talk, it sort of normalizes sort of a soft form of pseudoscience, right? Unproven therapies. To try it, and you certainly see that more with people like Bryan Johnson when you go to the other end of the continuum. But I think it all kind of invites that.
So Rina, you must know journalists and writers who are capitalizing on these types of trends in their writing and reporting.
Yeah, and listen. Characters such as this, by the way, now I'm afraid to point to him. Is he very litigious or something? I'm afraid now because you were afraid. But yeah, this is the same conversations that we've had with people like Andrew Huberman, who's a very famous podcaster, who also sells a bunch of supplements and sometimes speaks outside his expertise. And like you said, really quantifies everything, is really all about the optimization of health. I would even say the fetishization of health.
A good way to put it.
And before that, we used to have talks about Gwyneth Paltrow is also really, shedding light on the fact that, women aren't being hurt by their doctor. This goes on and on. This has always been happening, that we kind of give a free pass to people who are at times pushing pseudoscientific or just treatments that don't have enough evidence behind them, and saying, well, at least they do X. And I think the bar is just so low. Yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of these people have been propelled, by, I'd say, a cult of personality. They're also helped by the media. I will tell you that I have pitched a piece on this character before, only to be told, but our readers really love him. We know that he says a bunch of bullshit, but we're waiting till someone else takes him down. And I was like, I can take him down. And they say, well, we don't want to take him down for his science because people kind of love what he says. Do you have anything on, has he abused any women, or has he tax fraud? They want to get these characters on something else before they
like
do
what
something
happened to
about evidence-based science, which is really, really sad. And that's what happened to Huberman. They got him on the fact that he had all these, I think, affairs with women and wasn't being honest with them. They didn't actually attack at first the science.
So the fact that he's selling, supplement stacks for hundreds of dollars, the fact that he's recommending ice baths not because the science says that they're beneficial, but because he gets paid to do so by manufacturers.
This is Huberman.
Huberman, yeah.
Yeah.
So none of that stuff is strong enough premise to go
because I will
after
tell you what I've heard from several editors, which is, well, everyone does that. That's just the name of the game. That's not even interesting. That's not something that's enough to necessarily attack someone.
But is it worse that the people who are doing this now are, in many cases, physicians and respected scientists? Because it's one thing if you have fitness influencers with no qualifications, but Huberman is a Stanford professor. They don't just give those professorships out.
Sure,
he's obviously a very smart guy.
But I think it's neuroscience. Like he speaks outside of his expertise all the
right,
time.
but the fact is was a respected scientist, professor at Stanford. Peter Attier is a physician. He's an MD, and now they're sort of glorified fitness influencers.
I think it is problematic, and we know that because of that, the legitimacy around their thinking. I mean, how many times, there's a lot of science communicators in the audience. How many times someone has responded to me, something I've said or posted or talked about it in the media with a link to a Huberman podcast, right? And I think that really speaks to the idea that this person has a degree of authority in what he and Attia's like this too. When they speak on a topic, and Huberman is really good at this. If you picked out a particular sentences, it's hard to point to exactly the pseudoscience. It's the gestalt of the entire podcast, right? Like when you hear a podcast about cold plunges or some supplement, the takeaway is not, the science is kind of iffy. There's some animal studies here. The studies that have been done are small. The effect size is probably meaningless. I'm not going to do it. The takeaway is, you should be doing this, right? You should be doing this. And that, I think, is super problematic and very powerful and very persuasive because he sounds so reasonable when he's talking about these things.
But it's also how people build a cult of personality. Gurus gather the masses with assurance, not probability. There's no such thing as a guru who says what a doctor might say to you, which is, well, there's an 80% chance if you use this protocol it might work. That's not how you gather the masses. You get people by saying, this will work, go do it. It worked for me. That's why anyone wants to listen to them.
We need a clinical trial where you do, everything that these individuals recommend on one, 100,000 people here and then 100,000 people just living a healthy lifestyle. And I can guarantee there'll either be no difference or these guys do better and they're going to have more fun.
Yeah, which is what it's all about, right? Okay. So let's move on. We've got the Menti thing up now. I'm not sure you're going to be able to link to it. So I think I'm just going to do an informal poll with a show of hands. The question is the longevity trend having a net positive or negative effect on population health and wellness? So forget the word wellness because we've sort of decided that it doesn't mean anything. Is the longevity trend and everything that it encompasses that we've discussed so far having a net positive or negative effect? Put your hands up if you think it's having a net positive effect. Okay, there's a handful of hands. Okay, thank you. And negative effect? A lot more. And if you're undecided voters, I think, yeah.
Undecided.
Okay, so I think probably my opinion is that it's having a net. I'm going to move on. Right. Okay, we're going to talk about Bryan Johnson, which was mentioned in Timothy's talk earlier on. He's a tech entrepreneur, self-proclaimed biohacker, intent on reversing the aging process through his project Blueprint. He follows a strict data-driven health regimen involving advanced diagnostics, dietary restrictions, exercise supplements, cutting-edge medical interventions. Of course, he's got the money to spend on it. Aiming to slow or even reverse the biological aging process. Documents his journey through his various social media channels. This is him pictured here with, he's the one in front, by the way, in case you couldn't tell the difference. That's his son behind him, who was for a time giving him regular blood transfusions in a practice known as, get this, young blood transfusions. That's what they've called it.
Yeah.
Genius.
He has a tagline, and it's "Don't die."
Don't die, right? Yeah. Which is, again, that's also genius. They stopped doing the blood transfusions when they realized it didn't work. Let's just watch a quick video that I got from his Instagram feed. Hopefully there's sound on here.
I came all the way to Singapore to ask one simple question. What are we gonna do? This is Don't Die Summit, a new series of events to help the world learn more about longevity science, and Singapore loved it.
I want to live longer to experience everything in the world.
I want to live longer because I want to build a product that people use and improves their lives. Technology is growing exponentially, so I want to see it all happen.
I want to live longer because it's giving me more time to have better impact in the world.
We started the day with a rave at 9:30 in the morning. We used the latest tech.
We combine over 70,000 genetic tests into just one.
We use the red light to activate your mitochondria.
This is my thingy eye. Track your sleep, stress, your VO2 max.
Yeah, way better than working out.
And we learned from the best in longevity science. At Don't Die, it's not just about trying to live forever, it's about living your best life. If this sounds like we are your people, join us at the next summit.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there.
I like the part where they go dancing at night. If more longevity
Those in the
treatments were
morning.
about that,
In the morning,
I would be for
9:30.
it.
That sounds like my idea of hell. A rave at 9:30 in the morning. Now that you've seen some footage of him in the picture, how old do you think he is? If you already know, then don't shout out. But give me some numbers. How old do you think Bryan Johnson is? 48, 45, 55? I mean, it could be anywhere feasibly from 45 to 60, couldn't he, really? He's 47. I mean, I think he looks older than 47. I mean, he definitely doesn't look as good as Timothy Caulfield. Oh, come on, let's be honest. And he's got a few years on you, right? So, Timothy, I know you've got your new documentary is out.
I came all the way to Singapore to ask one simple question. What are we gonna
Your new documentary is out. It's on CBC now. I wanted to ask you, did you meet any Bryan Johnson types in your filming or people aspiring to live forever?
Well, it's interesting because we were thinking of trying to include Bryan Johnson, and we decided that he wasn't...
You're not manly enough?
That's not how I was going to frame it, but... That's how I was going to frame it.
I was going to say,
but okay,
actually,
you made it easy. Brevity.
When I went out for my talk, I was actually going to say, because I'm lactose intolerant, so I only drink soy milk, so I'm a soy boy.
Oh, you are a soy boy. You can tell. Look at him.
Come and say it to my face, Caulfield. Sorry, what are you saying?
Oh, it's go time. We didn't include Bryan. So our urine drinker was very much supposed to fill that spot in our
fill it with urine.
Fill it with urine. Okay. I was going to say void.
That's good.
And so he, very much same theme, but he was more about the natural. So there is an interesting little tension in the manosphere in the male wellness sector, where you have the Liver King types, where it's all about ancestral, and maybe you've seen this too, ancestral living and hearkening back to very simple, straightforward ways of doing things, and the high tech community, right? So I put them both under the umbrella, but the goal is the same. Right, and the other thing that's interesting about this goal is it's also about this optimization idea, and I also think it's what we also see with people like Bryan Johnson is this idea it's on you, it's your responsibility, right, to do these things, and if you're not doing, so there's some really interesting literature which I'm sure you're both familiar about how this kind of language takes the responsibility away from communities and populations, and also makes it so the public is less willing to support public health interventions. There have been really interesting research on that. And you certainly see, and I'm seeing it happen in my own province, where there's this idea of taking the responsibility of population health away from the public and putting it on the individual. And this is a really common theme in the longevity world, right? And one of the most important things to living a long time, pick the right parents, right? Select your parents. right? And be fortunate to live in a good socioeconomic situation, and then luck. Those are probably the three most important factors. And longevity, it's for privileged people. It's for people who have money and time.
Lots of time.
Lots of time to
Lots
do
of time. Lots
the
of time.
stuff, the cold plunges and the raves at 9 in the morning.
And it puts the onus on the individual, like you were saying. I mean, I have the same sort of I'd say criticisms of self-care culture where it's on you to tackle these things. And it eventually sets you up for self-blame because, newsflash, this dude's gonna die. He's going to die one day. And we're also just subject to genetics, which you just can't control. And it's really funny because he does do a lot of the high-tech stuff. Like he gets stem cell treatments in Mexico and all these weird places. But the majority of the stuff that he's basically trying to sell to people are supplements, cryotherapy, IV infusions. These are all stuff that you could kind of find at any resort now, or even at local gyms. I mean, this stuff is going to run its course
and
very
all
well.
Free.
This,
all science free.
Totally. This stuff does not have enough, evidence behind it. But this stuff is going to kind of run its course. Already, longevity is becoming something that people eye roll at because they're I know exactly what that means. And these longevity clinics will go out of business because insurance companies definitely aren't going to pay for them. And they're basically more of a novelty for people. It's the same thing that happened with the ketamine clinics where people were I want to try it so that I have something fun to talk about at my next book club. But the idea that someone is going to actually pay to go for these and spend $40,000 a year is just not going to do it.
So just on that, there is a gym. I think it's a chain of gyms, and I think their headquarters is in it's either Hollywood or Beverly Hills, California, and they have this Optimum program where members can pay premium prices.
Equinox, $40,000 a year program?
Right, $40,000 a year membership.
Yeah, right.
And through that membership, you obviously get personal training, and you get body composition testing. You get
a sleep trainer, a nutritionist. You're basically treated like a top athlete,
right.
For a race car driver, which honestly sounds exhausting.
Regular blood samples.
Yeah,
and
it's
things this
ongoing. It's so much work.
Right. So my question is, we agree that the vast majority of these interventions are not necessary to improve overall health and quality of life. But if somebody has the money, let's say they're a movie star and they have the money to spend $40,000 a year on this kind of intervention, and it's the only thing that they can do to actually get them physically active and thinking more about their health and maybe drinking a little bit less and smoking less, is it ultimately worth it? Is it ultimately worth the investment?
No.
I don't think so. There's other ways to do it.
Explain your work.
And it's also, I think it leads to things like orthosomnia, being upset, an unhealthy obsession with sleep. I think this leads to an obsessiveness with our health, and I don't think that helps people. I don't want an entire team that I have to check in with every day to optimize my exercise, my sleep, and nutrition. That's exhausting. Like I said, I think they're all going to go out of business.
I think it's for all those reasons, for sure. I don't think it gives you a healthy relationship with those activities, right? Which is what you want. You want to live your life. You want to enjoy your exercise. You want to enjoy your food, right? Because then you die, Bryan Johnson. But the other problem, I think, is, and I mean this, Nick. I think it can do harm, physical harm, right? Iatrogenic injuries, anxiety. These people are getting full body MRIs, right? They're doing genetic testing. No evidence to support any of that, and likely you're going to do harm, right? You're going to do harm. And also, it's not good for our healthcare system either, right? People that get their unnecessary tests, and then they go to their family physician. They go to see my wife. I know this. She's a family doc, and she tells me this happens. And it's a burden on the healthcare system too. So I think it's not helppful for the individuals, and it's harmful for society. And ultimately, it's a big negative. Now, listen, I'm not saying that that these people need to get active, and there might be other ways they can do it. I just think spending $40,000 a year on this kind of nonsense is the way forward.
And the media attention that it gets, it actually makes some people think that that's what they should be striving for. If I had money, that's what I should be doing.
That's right.
That's the only way to be fit and healthy.
I should be going to a 9:30 a.m. rave. That's what they think.
I think this is a really important point. And I hear this all the time, and I'm sure other people in this room. They think that athletes and celebrities have access to some kind of secret potions and secret. You know this, Nick. You watch these Netflix shows on athletes, and they're getting rehabbed. None of it is science-based. I just can't believe it, right? But the public watches that and say, if I had the money and I could work my whole bad shoulder back, I'd get on the field sooner. There's just no evidence to support that at all. And it creates this guilt and expectation, and it helps the pseudoscience industry thrive because it normalizes it.
Right. So if only I had access to my own cryotherapy chamber, and if I could do hyperbaric oxygen therapy, then I'd be able to exercise regularly and be healthy and fit, that kind of thing. Well, I mean, it's a nice segue because I've got a nice little slide here. This is a study from 2020 showing that female and male U.S. Olympic athletes live 5 years longer than the general population, than their general population counterparts. So this is a study of over 8,000 former U.S. Olympians. So it shows that if you're an Olympic athlete, so if you are training and competing full-time as an athlete and then you retire, and presumably Olympic athletes are going to be more physically active, they're going to be more health conscious later on in life, even long after retirement. And we see the same kind of trends in the first cohort of individuals to crack the 4-minute mile. So Roger Bannister and his contemporaries, they on average live 4 to 5 years longer. So we can spend tens of thousands of dollars on these crazy interventions and the cold plunges and the hyperbaric chambers, but ultimately you can do everything right. You can be an Olympic athlete, which most people are not, and you may only live 4 to 5 years longer. It comes down to your genetics, which is what you mentioned.
Yeah, and those studies, I think they did control for socioeconomics, did they not?
Yes.
Yeah. But we do have to remember that these individuals, as you point out, they get that much of a lifespan gain, which isn't huge, but they're still genetically predisposed just to be interested in doing all these, things to stay fit, which was one of the reasons they became an Olympic athlete in the first place. And you've seen the same with similar studies with cyclists, et cetera. So, yeah, this is best case scenario, right? You've got the right genes, you're living in the right environment, and this is the most you can hope for.
Right, and I think it's also, to add to that, it's sort of unreasonable for vendors of longevity to expect people to live healthier lives than the average Olympic athlete, because most people are not going to do that. And the good news is that if you, people who meet the physical activity guidelines, so that's just, walking for doing physical activity for 30 to 60 minutes every day, 5 days a week, and doing some kind of strength training exercise twice a week. It's pretty conservative by design, but people who meet the physical activity guidelines have a reduced hazard ratio of 30 to 40% relative to people who are inactive. That equates to, guess what? About 5 years. So we don't need to be a sub 4-minute miler. We don't need to be an Olympic athlete. We just need to be physically active and look after our bodies. That's kind of the way to maximize your longevity. Let's move on to, because we've touched upon this already, I want to talk about activity trackers. Less than half of the US adults meet the physical activity guidelines. So this is, I've got the proper definition here, 150 to 300 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity per week. That's according to the World Health Organization. Less than 10% of the population even know what those guidelines are, which is a concern. 80% of people don't meet the guidelines. Activity trackers have proliferated, and they're becoming more and more sophisticated. You can see some of the gadgets and gizmos on the screen here. They measure everything from sleep to steps, heart rate, oxygen saturation, and more. In a few years, we'll have sweat sensors that measure the sweat for various metabolites related to health and disease. Some of the people at my lab at the Linguist Institute at UCLA, they recently won an enormous NIH grant to look at using sweat sensors to predict asthma attacks and exacerbation in COPD, which is actually potentially a legitimate use of these things. How much is too much data, and can we become obsessive? Rina Raphael.
Yeah, I've done a lot of reporting on activity trackers, and I think it's interesting that I forget what number it is, so I'm afraid to say it, but I think it's maybe like a third or 2/3 of Americans shove their activity tracker into a drawer after a couple of weeks. Like they just tire of it, like they're sick of it. And it's because one study found, and they believe it's because the more you track something, the less you enjoy it. So whether that's sleep, whether it's running, whether it's walking, the more you're tracking in every minute and data logging it, the the more you just are like, ugh, I have to take care of this thing. It's like feeding a Yamagata. So, so people get sick of it. So, and also these things, as much as they love to say that they're so personalized, they're not exactly personalized just yet. They may be, the new editions that are coming out. But a lot of people are like, well, how do I tell my tracker that I'm sick, or that I need some downtime, or I need some self-care? Like, they're not really perfect machines just yet. So I think it really depends. Like, some people, it does really, motivate them to get outside and move. And for other people, it just drives them bonkers. So I think you have to know what type of person you are. But the majority of people shove them into a drawer.
Do either of you guys measure activity or heart rate variability or sleep? Do you measure any of these metrics?
I don't do anything at all. And I used to be, this is one of those things I've changed my mind on. It's always good to keep I've mentioned this to someone during a coffee break, keep a list of things that you've changed your mind about as the evidence emerged. And this is one of them. I don't track anything, Nick, not a single thing. And I don't think the evidence supports it for all the reasons that Rina highlighted. And I think, look, you probably know this better than both of us. The data's messy on the utility. It's messy on, does it increase activity or decrease activity? I think the evidence is pretty consistent about the enjoyment thing. But what I always say is, look, if you like your activity tracker, you get joy out of it, and you find enjoyment, it's awesome. But I don't think I think most of the evidence tells us it's not a fix. I also think that there is this obsession, this belief that more evidence is always, more data is always good. And that's simply not the case, whether you're talking about a full body MRI, whether you're talking about genetic testing, really microbiome, on and on and on. There's very little evidence to support that, because the bottom line, it comes back to what you just said. We already know what a healthy lifestyle looks like, right? We already know, and wearing, none of this stuff is going to change that basic reality.
Well, Nick, I'd love to know your opinion on this, because I've interviewed exercise researchers who've told me that they've seen a rise in people who are becoming obsessed with fitness because of their trackers. And I know I did a story on youth, specifically in public school programs where they were given trackers for their wellness classes, and it really did spur a lot of them to become obsessed and worry about, like, no, mom and dad, I can't go out for pizza tonight. I have to, like, go and do my steps and stuff of that sort. And
well, people are doing blood glucose.
Yeah,
now,
these
right?
were kids. Yeah. These were teens. But I'm curious if you found anything in research regarding sort of extreme behavior and trackers. I know it seems very limited research right now.
Yeah, in terms of like the psychopathology, I'm not really clued up on that kind of research because it's not my area. But what I have seen is that there is certainly, as Timothy just said, it's like there's a double-edged sword. For some people, they might use it in a perfectly healthy way, and it encourages them to be physically active and to think more carefully about how active they're being, because most of us have sedentary jobs, and the whole idea of this 10,000 steps a day thing, 10,000 steps,
was arbitrary.
It's completely arbitrary, and it was designed by a vendor of pedometers. The manufacturer of pedometers, right, exactly, came up with this idea, and everyone should be hitting 10,000 steps a day. That said, if you're only getting 4,000 steps a day, you are classified as sedentary. That's not enough to be physically active, and for that physical activity to have a benefit on your health. So if you're if you're not getting enough physical activity, having your steps counted and having some kind of indication of that might be a prompt for you to be, okay, maybe I need to be a bit more physically active and get out and go and walk for 30, 45 minutes every day. So if you can use it in that sense, great. And every athlete that I've ever worked with has been obsessed with data, and they sort of have to be. And they love the numbers, and they want to see the blood samples, and they want to know what their lactate concentration is, to the point where they are asking me questions that I can't answer. And they're so astute, and they're not really formally educated in this stuff, but they're asking questions that I hadn't even thought of because they're so clued in on their body's physical responses to these things.
Well, I also think that this is something, it depends. Like, for example, I hear from a lot of people who use trackers for fitness. They're like, okay, if I'm not getting enough steps, then I know I have to go get more steps in. It's very simple. But it's a little sometimes different with like sleep trackers, because people get a sleep score and it says, oh, I slept shitty. What the hell am I supposed to do with that information?
Sleep harder,
now?
sleep better.
Sleep better. So like that's kind of like the problem. Like it really also depends on whether or not you're actually able to sort of combat whatever it is that you're suddenly told you're missing.
And there was one study that found that it for some people it makes you exercise less, right? Oh, I got my 10,000. I'm not going to, I'm not going to walk anymore. I'm going to sit down. Where you might have kept walking had you not known that you've gone for 10,000. And there's also, even in the context of diseases, I think the question is open. There was an interesting study that was published, I'm going to say like 2 weeks ago, looking at people with AFib wearing smart. And they found that it increased anxiety, it increased unnecessary utilization, and unclear if it had any health benefits, right? So if you have AFib, you just think about your AFib constantly, and now you have a watch to monitor that. And from a lifestyle perspective, from a well-being perspective, that's probably not so good.
So this sort of touches on what you mentioned earlier about having more data is not necessarily more power, because atrial fibrillation in a lot of cases it's often asymptomatic, and it's usually it's often completely benign. I shouldn't say always, but that's one of those scenarios where knowing more isn't necessarily going to put you in a better position. It might just cause more anxiety and more problems. I want to move on. Did you have?
No, I think just the bottom line is know what you're like. What do you do when you get more information about something? Are you someone who becomes more obsessive? Are you chill about things? Like, I think you just have to know your personality.
And I think whatever you need to do to be more physically active, I know I keep laboring your point, but long periods of sitting, I shouldn't say this at the back long periods of sitting is an independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease. They've done really interesting studies in elite athletes who are training full time, so they're training 2 or 3 times a day. And the athletes who sat around and did nothing in between training sessions, they had worse cardiovascular health and higher body fat percentage. We're talking about elite athletes than people who were generally more physically active. So the more active we can be, the better. And if you want to use a step counter to prompt you to be more physically active, and you can use it in a healthy way, I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with that, with the caveats that we've already mentioned. Let's move on. I want to ask the audience if they've ever tried any diets. If anybody's brave enough just to yell out the names of any diets that you've tried. Veganism, keto, we've heard, yeah.
I heard a blood type.
Say again? See, the seafood and eat it, yeah.
That's good.
I gotcha. That's a Tommy Cooper joke, I think. Atkins. Is it 1999 again? Atkins? Genotype, carnivore. Yeah, I spoke to somebody on carnivore recently. You guys ever tried any diets? Any commercial diets, I should say?
No commercial diets, but I'm a weird intermittent faster. Just because I work at home more and more, and I just find it a way not to snack. Like, I don't think there's any magic to it, Nick. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't think there's any. But I just find it's a good way to.
Well, I'm asked this an awful lot. What do I think about intermittent fasting? And I normally say 2 things. Number one, if you're trying to use your eating for weight management, then if you want to use intermittent fasting to get yourself into a negative calorie balance, then that's up to you. If that's something that you can do healthily and sustainably, I don't have a problem with that. The second thing I would ask is, what's gone wrong in your day-to-day diet that's forced you to starve yourself for 8 hours at a time?
My wife is an incredible baker, right. And I work at home.
Right, there you go.
That's what went wrong.
Well, and actually, I mean, you say that, and it goes back to what we were just saying. But yeah, I work largely from home, or I'm hybrid working. I spend most of my time writing on my laptop, so it's very easy to sit around all day and not move an awful lot. And I get to 6 p.m. and I realize I've barely moved around at all. I've just moved around the apartment or gone to the local coffee shop, which is about 200 steps away. So yeah, it's good to be cognizant of these things. So the health and wellness industry is a multi-trillion-dollar industry. About a quarter of the revenue stems from nutrition and dietary supplements. How are these things portrayed in the media? And is there an overemphasis on trendy new eating regimens in the pursuit of health and wellness?
Yeah, and I mean, people always try new diets or put their faith in some new ingredient or protocol because I think that Americans like to believe in promising quick, easy fads. And it's oftentimes propelled also by the media that makes it sound like if you put your faith in this new thing, it'll work out. And it's a revolving door, and that's why it's so lucrative. So people try Atkins. When that doesn't work, they'll move to South Beach. When that doesn't work, they just keep going and trying the next thing. Because ultimately, you get sick of a diet, and it just won't work for you anymore. Or it works in the beginning, and it's just so exhausting, you're like, I can't do it anymore. So overall, it's a lucrative industry because of that. What was your second part of your question?
Is there an overemphasis on trendy new eating regimens
Yeah.
Are we overemphasizing it in the media generally?
Yeah, because they need content.
Right, it's
and
clickbait.
your earlier advice, again, is super boring. And so, like, the only thing that is going to sell is there's this new hot dye that everyone's talking about, or sea moss is a hot new ingredient that you have to try. And none of these things, there's no one ingredient that's ever going to revolutionize your health in the same way that probably a diet isn't going to as well. And some of them can be actually dangerous. I write about in my book about how I started on clean eating. And once you can basically only eat produce and you don't have time to cook yourself fresh, nutritious, meals or beautifully designed acai bowls, well, you get pretty hungry pretty easily, to a point where I started eating baby food because I was like, this is the easiest thing to eat and buy. Like, that's what it actually comes down to. So, yeah, I think they can be sort of dangerous, all these fad diets, and the way they're portrayed by the media.
For sure. And we've written about this a lot, as you know, Nick. And let's, ask the audience this. In the history of dieting, has there ever been a trendy diet that turned out to be right? And I don't think there ever has been. I think the answer is, and I wonder if everyone in the room agrees with this, the best diet is a healthy diet that works for you. It's sustainable and works for you. That's the best diet.
Yeah, and actually it's been extensively studied now. And if somebody, for example, is using food for a weight management tool, then it needs, for it to be classified as a successful eating regimen, it needs to be sustainable for 5 years or longer. So in fact, the vast majority of fad diets, they work in the short term because they shift you into negative calorie balance, so you lose weight, and 2/3 of people put on all the weight that they've lost within 6 months to 1 year. 1/3 of people put on more weight than they originally lost because they have this rebound effect, and people just bounce from one fad diet to the next, never really realizing any long-term success. So it's about doing whatever you're going to do, it has to be sustainable long-term. I want to move on because we're running out of time. This is just something interesting that I started reading about a little while ago. So various studies on the role of oxytocin in longevity. Oxytocin is often called the love hormone, which is a bit of a misnomer because it's not really the love hormone. You get a spike of oxytocin whenever you bond with somebody, if you stare into your lover's eyes, or if you pet your dog, which is a different kind of love, but you get a spike of oxytocin, and it has a really important role in social bonding and stress regulation. Recent research suggests it may also impact aging and longevity, counteracting the age-related decline in muscle mass, cardiovascular health, and inflammation. So, do we just need more cuddles? Timothy Caulfield.
I hugged you when I first saw you. Did I not? Did I not?
Felt great.
Yeah, I'm not a hugger. So this is the new Tim. I'm trying to evolve. Look, I think the research is pretty clear. And it's hard to study this well because all these variables. Community, family, friends, that they matter. Isolation, loneliness, correlated, yes, is correlation research, detrimental. Whether it's the love drug, I don't know. But I think it's, and in our documentary, we actually explore this. I do think community and friends, I think it matters. And the other thing is, you know what? Damn it, we're not here on this planet Earth that long. And even if it doesn't matter to how long you're going to live, it matters in so many other ways.
Well said.
Yeah.
I agree with that 100%. And I think one of the reasons you don't hear a ton about community or cuddles, or even just hugging dogs, as you mentioned before, is because it's not easy to monetize.
Yeah.
There's just no money in it, and that's why the industry isn't interested in it.
Nick's hug was priceless.
I should start charging, maybe. Start selling them. All right. Last couple of slides, I think, because I know we're just about out of time. The real health and longevity. I've been an exercise scientist now for about 2 decades, and everything I've learned, I've kind of boiled down in terms of actually being healthy and maximizing longevity. I've boiled down into a series of recommendations. Speak up if you disagree with something, basically. So I've said, don't smoke. Generally, no judgment. If you smoke, you're cool. You're a grown adult. You can do what you like. But ideally, if you want to be healthy, don't smoke. Don't drink a lot. There's plenty of research showing that drinking alcohol is not good for your health, contrary to popular belief, contrary to what we'd all love to believe. Any objections so far? Okay. Eat well. I know that that's deliberately ambiguous because what eating well means is going to be different for different people depending on what your demands and your requirements are. But eating a healthy, balanced diet, move as much as physically possible. The more movement, the better. Whether that's structured exercise or going for regular walks or housework or chores or doing gardening, whatever it is, just move in one way or another. All good? Sophie?
I didn't see cuddles. I didn't see Timothy.
I haven't finished yet.
Okay.
Get enough sleep. Now, I've put enough in italics here because you don't need 10 hours of sleep a night. Some people function perfectly well on 7 hours. If you're falling asleep in the middle of the day or if you're tired or lethargic, you might need more sleep. Somewhere between 7 and 9 hours is usually fine for most people. Agreed?
Yep.
Okay. Be mindful. Again, this is ambiguous. We spend so much time talking about physical. We just sort of alluded to it. We spend so much time talking about physical health. Don't neglect your mental health as well. We've got to look after our bodies and we've got to look after our minds. Be mindful of your stress and your mental health. Talk to people, get more cuddles, and don't just go through life like a zombie. And lastly, I've got kick the tires. That basically means, I saw a great quote a little while ago, and that was, the best time to start thinking about your cardiovascular health was 15 years ago. And I think it's a great quote because it basically applies, unless you're, 30, which most people here are not, I think it really holds up. So stay on top of your metrics. Go and see your physician from time to time. Make sure you know what your cholesterol is. We talked about not going over too many metrics. Make sure your blood pressure isn't high. Check your cholesterol. Kick the tires. If you're a car driver, you know that you wouldn't just go and drive hundreds of miles without ever taking your car for a service, because sooner or later the thing's going to bloody well break down. The good news is you can always buy a new car. You know what I'm saying about this? Right, let's end with a quote.
I want to go back to your list?
Yes.
What about sensible preventative strategies? Wear a seatbelt, get vaccinated.
I love that, yeah.
And that could go under, as part of your kick the tires, I think. Just those basic wear a bike helmet.
It's low-hanging fruit, isn't it?
Yeah. And we know it makes a difference for longevity too, right? Not just for, increasingly the evidence tells us that.
Like I have a motorcycle, but I never ride it because I don't want to die. Longevity, this is the quote, longevity isn't about chasing the latest health fad or miracle cure. It's about understanding the complexities of the human body and recognizing that no single solution can defy aging. Critical thinking, not wishful thinking, is our best tool for living a long, healthy life. Who do you think said that? It was ChatGPT, actually.
It's great.
It's disappointing, isn't it? Okay, I know I've got a real quote. I'm not going to end on that quote. This is a real quote from a real person. Some say that no one should form an opinion about anything they have not tried themselves. That's ridiculous. By that reasoning, I would have to jump out of an airplane without a parachute to find out if the fall would kill me. Any guesses? It's the late, great Harry Hall. Thank you for your time, folks. We hope you found it interesting.
Thank you, Nick.
My wonderful panel.
Oh, to Nick.
Rina Raphael, Timothy Caulfield.
And Nick Taylor. Thank you all for that excellent discussion. We all will benefit and live at least 5 years longer from that. Thank you.